The following program is a special presentation of the Big Ten Network, produced in association with the University of Wisconsin.
He graduated in 1967 with a degree in English from the University of Wisconsin-Madison during the cultural foment that was that town in the late 60s. He's gone on to work with some of the greatest names in the music world, and we'll meet him next, so stay with us. Playing in a college band with Boz Scaggs and Steve Miller may not automatically make you cool, but it's a great start. Add 25 solo albums to that tune, produced for the likes of Diana Ross, Mose Allison, and a favorite of mine, Van Morrison, and you've got a sound that is recognized throughout the jazz world. And better yet, Ben Sidron hasn't let success keep him away from the place he loves. He's managing this entire body of work from Madison, Wisconsin. Ben, welcome.
Thank you, John.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
So, how did Madison in the 60s inform your art and who you are now? Because it was an incredibly interesting time. Well, and to a certain extent, you were one of the people who made it interesting.
Well, when I got here, there were very few, what's the word? I don't want to, counterculture. There wasn't, right. I got here before the counterculture. Right. And I mean, I got here in 60, 61,
so
Wisconsin.
You saw the worm turn.
Absolutely. I remember the first riots on State Street were panty raids, and all the guys were screaming, you know,
talk about politically
throw it down, throw it down. And Wisconsin went to the Rose Bowl.
Right.
At the start of the 60s.
Pat Richter, Ron Vanderkellen.
By the end of the 60s, everybody wanted to be a musician. The riots were about the war. It was a complete 180-degree turn, and I witnessed it.
So you're here, come from Racine, and how did you answer the question your freshman year, hey, Ben, what's your major?
Well, I came here. They have a program here at the University of Wisconsin. It's a wonderful program called the Integrated Liberal Studies Program, which grew out of the Alexander Meiklejohn program from the 30s. And what it does is, for the first 2 years, your freshman and sophomore years, you take all the requirements in terms of Greek and Roman literature, culture, history, sciences and stuff, and you get that out of the way. So I didn't have to answer that. I just said, well, I'm going to do this. I'll get the requirements out of the way, and by the time I'm a junior, I'll figure out what I'm going to do.
Do you trust any freshman in college who knows what his or her major is?
Well, you know, these days...
I don't. You're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to, but I understand that today, more than 50% of the freshmen who come in think or know they want to be business majors. That's what's going on in colleges today. Well, when I was a freshman, first of all, I don't think anybody wanted to be a business major, and you would have found 40% history majors.
Right,
so
which I was. I got a question for you. So you're playing keyboards, although you're not a music major.
Right.
You play up on the second floor of the Union, anywhere place you can find a piano. You're playing in the Ardells with Boz Scaggs and Steve Miller, gigging during the summer and during the fall, playing the frat houses, all this sort of stuff.
Right.
The Beatles go on Ed Sullivan.
Yep.
Everyone's a rock musician.
Yep.
And you decide to become, for the rest of your life, a jazz musician. You went against form.
Well,
even though you helped Steve Miller and you backed some people up, you never really wandered away from jazz. Is that a fair statement?
No, that's absolutely right. And there was actually a moment where I think is kind of a germane moment in my musical orientation, which is I always loved jazz. I grew up loving Horace Silver and Louis Jordan, but at the same time I loved Ray Charles, of course, but he played jazz also.
Right.
Cannonball Adderley was kind of groove jazz. When I came to the University of Wisconsin and I met Steve and Boz, they turned me on to Jimmy Reed, they turned me on to Texas Shuffles, they turned me on to T-Bone Walker, which I loved, but they also turned me on to the fact that if I played in a rock and roll band, I could make $50.
And meet younger women than jazz musicians meet.
Well, no, they were all young.
Come on.
No, all the women were young.
Well,
I mean, there were no old women at the time. But as a leader of my little jazz trio, I made $35 a night.
Gotcha.
And playing piano in Steve's little rock band, I made $50 a night. So it was an economic incentive. It was fun to do. But I have to say, from the very beginning, I did not feel comfortable with the amount of alcohol that was being consumed. I mean, I liked to party and hang out as much as anybody, but I used to see Steve lie flat on his back, you know, just trying, you know, I mean, it was just, I never liked it.
Well, that was part of the wretched excess of the 60s. It wasn't just rock and roll.
Right.
I mean, and Madison was part and parcel of that. And you see a little bit of it today now, too. I lament the fact that people have to be so wasted, frankly.
I was never part of the wretched excess. I was one of the exceptions where it's true that I did some self-medication.
I heard you help Steve with some of that, too.
Well, I readjusted his prescription. But the fact is, we thought at the time, and we were coming out of Bohemia. We weren't coming out of hippies, and we were coming out of this.
You were Beats.
We were Beats, and we were thinking that what we were doing was a form of freeing our mind and exploring unknown territories, not so much getting blasted. Yes, we were right.
So then you moved to L.A. for a little while, and then you moved right back to Madison. What prompted that?
Actually, what I did is I lived in Madison through the 61, 2, 3, 4 something, then got it in my mind I was going to live in San Francisco. And I moved to San Francisco in 65 and 66.
From Madison to frying pan into the fire.
Chasing a girlfriend, of course.
Oh, okay. Well, 'twas ever thus.
Ever thus. Got to San Francisco, hung out there in the Beat period. I saw Lenny Bruce at the Blackhawk.
Wow. And Haight-Ashbury was...
Before.
Before, okay.
I lived on Haight Street when it was a little Italian neighborhood.
Right.
Came back to the University of Wisconsin, graduated, went to England, went to graduate school. Sussex in England in 67. When Steve had gone to San Francisco and became a rock and roll star.
Right.
And then after England, after getting my degrees, I went to LA, and I moved to LA then.
I want to hear more about that, and mostly I want to hear about how Ben gave himself the chance to make his passion his occupation as well. What a beautiful thing.
Consider this. There's a public university that consistently ranks among the top in the number of Peace Corps volunteers and in the number of graduates serving as CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, whether they are leading corporations or changing the world. The next time you see people doing extraordinary things, they are probably Badgers. The University of Wisconsin-Madison. Forward thinking.
We're back with Ben Sidron, one of the great, most distinctive keyboard players in all of America and the world, actually. You know, Ben, what about this whole thing, The Road is Lonely? You travel a lot out of Madison. You play all over the world. I saw you in an airport. You were just coming back from recording an album with Mose Allison and Van Morrison, which I had a lot of envy there because I'm a huge Van. Being an Irish Catholic, I'm a huge Van fan. How was it working with Van? Is he a grumpy old Irishman, or...?
Well, yeah, he's kind of gnarly, but the fact is that he is so spontaneous and so intuitive that...
And he's very jazz.
Oh, yeah.
His vocals are very jazz.
Never does the same thing twice.
Right.
Does everything live when you're in the studio with him. If you played it, that stays on the record if you sang it. And it was challenging for me, because I'm not really a singer. I mean, as you said before, I came up with Steve Miller and Boz Scaggs singing on either side of me, so why would I sing, you know?
Yeah.
But then I became a singer out of necessity, and I'm singing there with Van Morrison. And, you know, it wasn't intimidating so much as it was inspiring.
Well, and I have to say, the kind of music you love fits well with the way he vocalizes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's scat for...
He's talking. It's a speech.
No question.
Yeah.
Here's what I envy about you and what I respect about you and what I think you can offer some wisdom to a whole new generation of young people who love music, because the tools of music and recording have become far more accessible. You took your passion and you make a living on it. At it now, and you're an entrepreneur about it. You have a radio show, you're on VH1, you've written books, you lecture, and you gig. What perspective do you have for young people who want to live their life, make a living with their passion, if it's music?
It's, actually, in my case, it's very interesting because I was a reluctant professional musician. That is, I always played, I worked my way through college playing, but the reason I was in England was to get a PhD in American Studies. I thought I was going to be a professor, a teacher, and I got my degree in 1971, and of course it was a very difficult time to get a job teaching because so many young men had stayed in graduate school to avoid going to Vietnam, and as it happened, I didn't get a job teaching. So I then decided to move to Los Angeles and get in the record business. So the way I got into the record business is by failing as a teacher. So when people say to me, how do I get in the record business? I say, you have to fail at something.
Right.
You have to fail at something, but I'm not kidding. And the reason I say that is because in jazz, one of the main lessons, this is not necessarily true in rock and roll, but in jazz, it's not so much what you perceive as your successes, but how you recover from what you perceive as your failures. Jazz is the art of recovery.
Yeah.
And by that I mean, when you come up in a situation that's not of your own making and you have to make something out of it, the way you do that is by embracing your instincts, not saying, oh gosh, I'm not as good as this person, I'm not as good as... No, who are you, what are you doing, what can you bring to this? Because that sense of differentiation is what you ultimately offer to somebody for $5.
Is it easier to make a living as a musician now as a young person or harder? Because the market has changed, the business has changed so much.
Yeah.
Everyone can record an album now.
Yeah.
So
well,
how do you differentiate from talent and
huge,
songwriting or just a bunch of people in their basement?
Huge question, because on the one hand, it used to cost $50,000 to make a record. Now it costs $50. You can do it in your house. The technology's there. On the other hand, everybody's making a record, so how is anybody going to find you? I would say overall, the collapse of the record business, as we've seen in the last few years, has been very good for creativity. Because
I would agree with that.
Very good. For example, right now, we were talking before we went on the air about iTunes.
I love iTunes, and I've been exposed to so many jazz artists that I never would have known. You know, I hear Ben Webster, I buy all of Ben Webster.
Yeah.
I hear Coleman Hawkins, I buy all of him.
Well,
or Bill Evans, you know, it's like, where were these guys?
Levels the playing field.
Yeah,
now,
totally.
Whoever you are,
Yeah.
you're available like they're available. And the question is, how do I drive people to some site where they can find me? And we have a lot of tools now in YouTube and a lot of other things. We have a lot of tools we didn't used to have. But is it easier to make a living? Probably not.
Chops matter still too.
You have to be able to
play.
Create. You know, because you know Moby, for example.
Yes, right.
Okay. Moby's not a great player.
No.
But he's really a good producer.
Yes.
So you can have producing chops as opposed to just performing chops.
Right.
The universe has gotten bigger.
You moved back to Madison, and you live here now.
Yes.
It would be easier to live in New York or Paris or L.A. Why did you choose to move back here?
You know, that really goes back to me being 17 years old and coming to Madison from Racine, Wisconsin. And I got here, and I'll never forget the afternoon I got here. I just said, Eureka, this is it. And I've always felt that Madison, as I say, you know, the road leads from New York to Madison as well as Madison to New York.
Yeah.
And when I first decided to move back from LA, and I would call people on the phone, you know, trying to get some work, they would all say, area code 608.
Where is that?
Where is that?
I agree. I've gotten that.
They
a lot
don't ask
too.
anymore.
No, they don't. No, they don't. And they also don't know where Wisconsin is. It's amazing how many people don't know.
It's like near Wyoming.
Where is it? Yeah, right. When we come back, I'd like to talk to Ben a little bit about who he's played with, which is pretty fascinating, and also get some questions from the audience. So please stay with us. Hi, we're in Madison, Wisconsin. We're talking with Ben Sidron. Ben, we want to show you some pictures. It's a little walk through the archives here, okay? Bring them up on the monitor if you would. Talk us through this. This is like a quick snapshot of your life.
That's me and Mose Allison. I was producing a record for him. That's taken in London. That's me and Richard Davis, great bass player. He moved to Madison in 1972. It was a great day. This is me and Richard and sax player Frank Morgan, Clyde Stubblefield, the original funky drummer from James Brown, recording a record here in Madison. This is me and tenor player Johnny Griffin. That picture was taken in Barcelona. We were making a record. This is me in 1963 at the University of Wisconsin in a little practice room.
You're looking very old and wise for a 20-year-old there, Ben.
Notice that I used to go to college with a sport coat and a tie.
That's a little frightening.
We used to do that.
Now you're not even wearing socks.
Progress.
I know, it is progress.
This is me, Mike Minieri. I keep saying this is me. Who else is it going to be? I forget it. That's me.
Yeah. Question for Ben. I'll start with you right here. Stand up. Thank you.
Hi, Ben. I know you did this series for public radio where you talked to all the jazz greats. Can you tell me which one was your favorite and why it was so memorable for you?
The series is out now in a box of CDs called Talking Jazz, and it's 60 interviews on 24 CDs, and I got to listen to all of them again. So I've heard them recently. And my favorite one really is the obvious one, which was Miles Davis. And the reason was he was so generous. He was such a sweet man. And, you know, I was so intimidated to meet him and the whole experience. And he was just great. And he was sweet. And the message that I took from that is be yourself. If you're yourself, no matter what situation you're in the right place. And when I talked to people who worked with Miles, they all said that. They said, oh, he really influenced me. And I'd say, well, how did he influence you? Well, I don't know. Just being with him let you know it was okay to be yourself.
I mean, he turned his back on the audience when he played half the time. I can see why you were fighting to meet him, because he was a very enigmatic character. I remember watching him when I was young, and he was like very different.
His nickname
he was not afraid to be different.
Was the Prince of Darkness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
but he was really a sweet man.
And the older I get, the more I appreciate his work.
Yeah.
I have to say, for whatever reason. Another question for Ben.
Hi, so you've played all over the world and you've played with some really famous musicians. Could you tell us maybe your top 3 most memorable performances?
Whoa. Top 3 most memorable performances. Well, the number 1 most memorable performance was at Carnegie Hall. I was there as part of a tribute to the late singer Eddie Jefferson, who had just passed away, and it was all jazz singers. So I was on stage. At one point, I was on stage at Carnegie Hall in a row with Dizzy Gillespie and John Hendricks and the Manhattan Transfer and Bobby McFerrin and all these real singers. And I was standing there, like John, holding a microphone in my hand, not even sitting behind a piano. And the reason it was so memorable was not because there I was, but I didn't feel happy. And I remember being on that stage saying, if you don't feel happy now, you have to go home and ask yourself some serious questions, because it's not going to get any better than this.
Well, you weren't playing.
No, it wasn't that. I wasn't happy, period. And I realized that if this doesn't make me happy...
Was Joe Williams there?
No, he wasn't, but Leon Thomas was.
Oh, great. Another question.
No, wait a minute, she gets 2 more.
Oh,
she
2
gets
more,
2 more.
sorry.
That was the number 1.
You can tell he's hosted a show before.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. This, I would say another great gig was the thing with Van Morrison and Mose Allison, and Georgie Fame was part of that gig.
Georgie Fame, wow, wow. There's
Georgie Fame and the Blue Flames.
Yeah.
It was just a great gig. But my favorite gig that I still would say was my best gig was playing at Mr. P's Club here in Madison with my son, just the 2 of us.
Beautiful.
He played drums, I played organ, and you know, it was at a time when I was getting pretty burned out playing live, and I didn't know why I was playing live anymore. And I got up there with him, and I looked at him, and his face was just glowing, and I realized that's why we play music. And so he really gave me my musical life back.
Well, there's a lot of artists say they get back on the road to reconnect with what they're doing, because the studio can suck the life out of you.
Yeah. Well, just being with him, because we're close personally.
Right.
And seeing what it was, what it felt like when it felt good for the first time. I remember that. It's like going downhill on a toboggan, and you're going really fast, and oh boy, this is it, I'm alive. And that's what it must have felt like to him.
The son teaches the father.
Absolutely.
We're going to be right back with more questions for Ben Sidron. Stay with us. All right, we're back live to tape in Madison, Wisconsin with the sweet, soulful Ben Sidron, great singer, wonderful keyboard player, and we have a question.
Yes.
Stand up, thanks.
I know you've written about the sense of place of Wisconsin. I was wondering how growing up here in Wisconsin and living in Madison, how that influences your music.
I think there's a real congruity between coming from Wisconsin, growing up with all the trials and tribulations and pleasures, and especially during the 50s when it was a pretty quiet time. I mean, literally quiet. There wasn't a lot of noise on the streets. You'd walk down the street and you'd hear the crickets, and you'd hear a plane 5 miles away. And the kind of personal intimacy that I use to approach music and performance, I think, comes from that. I really do think I'm a Wisconsin artist.
Another question.
I just wanted to know, do you believe in artistic temperament? Do you think you have to have drama and angst in your life in order to be a good performer?
Boy, that's a good question. I would say no. I would say, but you do need alienation. I think that whatever it is that allows you to develop a personal voice and really to go at it is related to a sense of alienation. You don't have to have drama. You don't have to have angst. And in fact, I think those things may be counterproductive. They really take away from your job. Your job is to somehow put into a vocabulary grammar and artistic grammar, the thing that everybody feels. You don't have to be weird. You just have to be kind of separated at some point, and obviously the younger the better.
So did your alienation come from being a Jewish kid in Racine, Wisconsin?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. I grew up in, there were no Jews in my neighborhood. The joke is there were 2 Jews in my high school. My sister was one of them. Because my father didn't want to grow up on the side of town where the other Jews lived, so I grew up in, and this is the 50s, you know, and I had my best friend when we were 12 said, "You can tell me, Ben, you can tell me, is it true that Jews use the blood of Christians for ceremonies?" And this was the person who knew me best. So, yeah, I felt very alienated.
You know, I'm roughly from the same time as you, and now you don't talk about people as being different. Okay, it's almost verboten. It's politically incorrect to talk about someone's ethnicity. But I grew up in a time where there was the Italian neighborhood, the Irish neighborhood, the black kids, the Jewish kids, and I thought it was colorful and interesting. It wasn't like anyone was better or less than anyone. They were just different, and you had fun with that difference, but frankly, everyone was poor. When I grew up, there was no social, there was no class thing.
I think that's one of the big differences today from 40 or 50 years ago. The interest in money and the focus on money today is extraordinary, and it's so other than what it was in the 60s. I mean, I had a meal job. I got up at 5 in the morning and went and served breakfast to kids. And I did it in return for, not for money, but for food, you know. And I worked in factories, and I had to make money to go to school and everything. But you didn't think of it. You thought about the book you were reading, or the record you were listening to, or you thought about these other things. The idea that money was just something you needed to live is so alien today.
Now you get a little check in the mail every time they play Space Cowboy by Steve Miller, because you were one of the writers of the song. And I have to ask you, as someone who went to Wisconsin, but as an artist, do you have any interest in Wisconsin sports or anything like that? Well, do you go to games or do you watch them on TV? Because if you don't know this, the entire student section at the football game sings a Steve Miller song now.
Yeah, I know, I see him.
You know, and it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is kind of funny. Well, believe me, Steve Miller does not need the royalties from the University of Wisconsin. I used to love the basketball games when it was in the old field house.
Yeah, I agree. That
the new place, God bless it, but I don't enjoy it. I like the pageantry of the football games, mostly for the bratwurst.
Yeah. Now, do you park people on your front lawn?
I don't.
Okay. Ben Sidron, thanks for being with us. Give it up for Ben, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll see you again next time. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Ben. Thanks so much.
The preceding program was produced by the University of Wisconsin in association with the Big Ten Network.